The music industry has a saying that every artist learns eventually, the hard way. The label is not your friend. The label is your partner in the specific and limited sense that a partner whose interests are aligned with yours is useful, and whose interests diverge from yours is something else entirely. In the history of popular music, classical, pop, rock, every genre that has ever produced artists significant enough to attract major label attention is full of stories of that divergence, of the moment when the commercial interests of an institution and the artistic integrity of the people it represents point in different directions, and the resolution of that tension costs someone something real. Il Volo reached that moment, and what happened when they did reveals more about who these three men are than almost anything else in their career. I'm Your Name, this is Il Volo Echo, and today we are telling the story of the massive falling out between Il Volo and their record label, what caused it, what it cost, and how they came out the other side with something more valuable than anything the label could have given them. To understand the falling out, you first have to understand the relationship from the beginning, because it did not start as an adversarial one. It started as something genuinely collaborative, a partnership between three extraordinary young artists and an institution that recognized their potential and was willing to invest in it. When Il Volo signed with Geffen Records in the period following their Ti lascio una canzone victory, the relationship had the quality of genuine excitement on both sides. The label saw something in these three boys that it had not seen before, a combination of classical vocal talent, youth, and crossover commercial potential that existed in a space between established categories and therefore represented both enormous opportunity and significant risk. The early years of the relationship were productive. The label provided resources, production budgets, promotional machinery, the access to markets and media that a major label can open for artists who could not reach them independently. And Il Volo provided what they had always provided: the voices, the performances, the specific and irreplaceable thing that no amount of label investment could manufacture, but that label investment could amplify and distribute to audiences around the world. The American breakthrough through PBS was, in significant part, a product of this collaboration working as it was supposed to work. The label's relationships, its marketing infrastructure, its ability to position Il Volo's music in front of the specific American audience that would respond to it most powerfully. All of that contributed to what happened. And in the aftermath of the PBS success, with albums climbing Billboard charts and concert venues selling out across America, the relationship was at its strongest. But success changes relationships, always, in ways that are predictable in retrospect and almost never anticipated in the moment. The commercial success of Il Volo's early American career generated a specific kind of institutional pressure that the artists themselves felt in the creative decisions that followed. The label had now invested significant resources in establishing a particular commercial positioning for the group, a specific image, a specific repertoire approach, a specific market identity that had proven it could generate the kind of sales numbers that a major label operation requires to justify continued investment. And that positioning, however commercially successful, was not identical to what Il Volo themselves understood their artistic identity to be. The tension began with repertoire. The question of what Il Volo would record, which songs in which languages, in which stylistic directions, is not a simple creative decision for a group operating at major label level. It is a negotiation, a complex multi-party conversation that involves the artists, their management, the label's A&R team, the marketing department, the international divisions responsible for different territories, and any number of other institutional voices whose interests are not always aligned with each other or with the artists at the center of the process. Il Volo's artistic instincts, particularly Piero's, whose commitment to the classical tradition runs deepest, pushed consistently toward the more demanding end of the classical crossover spectrum, toward repertoire that showcased the full operatic weight of their voices, toward the kind of musical ambition that great voices deserve and that the classical tradition demands. The label's commercial instincts pushed in a different direction, toward the more accessible, more immediately radio-friendly end of the classical crossover spectrum, toward the songs that had tested well with focus groups, that had the melodic accessibility that mainstream markets respond to, that could cross over from the classical chart into the broader pop chart, where the real commercial numbers lived. Neither of these positions was wrong. Both represented legitimate perspectives on what Il Volo's career could and should be. But they were in tension, and as the years passed and the stakes of each creative decision grew larger, the tension grew with them. The falling out, when it came, was not a single dramatic confrontation. It was the product of accumulated disagreements that had been managed, negotiated, and partially resolved over years, but that had never been fully addressed at the level where the fundamental difference lay. The difference between what the label wanted Il Volo to be and what Il Volo knew themselves to be. The specific trigger was a recording project, a proposed album that the label's creative team had developed around a commercial concept that Il Volo's own artistic instincts told them was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of being bad music. The production values would have been high. The commercial potential was real, but wrong in the sense of being a version of Il Volo that was shaped more by market research than by genuine artistic truth. A version that would have sold records, but would have moved them further from the specific, authentic thing that their best music had always been. The conversation that followed this proposal was the most direct and the most difficult of the entire label relationship. All three of them were present. Their management was present. Senior figures from the label were present. And for the first time in the relationship, the fundamental disagreement, the one that had been managed and negotiated around for years, was on the table directly. Piero spoke first, and what he said, in the careful, precise, unequivocal way that is characteristic of him when something genuinely matters, was the clearest articulation of Il Volo's artistic position that had ever been offered in a label meeting. He was not aggressive. He was not emotional in the way that label meetings sometimes become when artists feel their creative identity is under threat. He was simply clear about what Il Volo was, about what they were not, about what they would and would not record, and about the fact that these were not negotiating positions, but genuine artistic convictions that no commercial argument, however well constructed, was going to move. Ignazio supported him with the specific quality of loyalty that defines his relationship with his partners, not simply agreeing, but adding his own perspective in the warmer, more interpersonally engaged way that is characteristic of him. He spoke about the audience, about the people who had come to Il Volo concerts and been genuinely moved, about what those people had responded to, not the commercial calculation, but the artistic truth, about what would happen to that response if the truth was compromised in favor of the calculation. Gianluca held the room in the way he always holds difficult rooms, with a steadiness and a clarity that made the conversation feel contained rather than explosive. He was the one who kept the negotiation from becoming a confrontation, who found the language that allowed both sides to understand what was actually at stake without the defensiveness that label meetings can generate when they reach the point this one had reached. The meeting did not end with a resolution. It ended with an acknowledgement, on both sides, that the relationship had reached a point where the fundamental questions could no longer be managed around, that what had been building for years had arrived at a moment of genuine reckoning. What followed was a period of genuine uncertainty, the kind that the people in Il Volo's inner circle still reference carefully. The weeks and months when the future of the label relationship, and with its significant aspects of the group's commercial infrastructure, was genuinely unresolved. There were conversations that went well and conversations that went badly. There were moments when resolution seemed possible, and moments when it seemed like the relationship had reached a point of no return. The legal and contractual dimensions of the situation added a layer of complexity. The specific obligations and rights that their label agreement created were not simple to navigate, and the process of understanding exactly what their options were required the kind of careful, detailed professional attention that consumed time and energy that should have been going into music. And through all of it, through the uncertainty and the legal complexity and the institutional pressure that a major label can bring to bear on artists whose contractual situation gives it leverage, all three of them maintained the clarity that Piero had brought to that initial meeting. They knew what they were. They knew what they were not. And they were not going to compromise the one to satisfy the demands of the other. The resolution, when it came, was not the clean victory that a simple story would require. Real institutional conflicts rarely resolve cleanly. What emerged from the extended negotiation was a reconfigured relationship, terms that gave Il Volo significantly more creative control over their recording decisions, while preserving the commercial partnership that the label's distribution and marketing infrastructure made genuinely valuable. It was not everything they had argued for, but it was enough. Enough to allow them to make the music they needed to make. Enough to protect the artistic identity that the conflict had been about from the beginning. Enough to move forward with the partnership on terms that both sides could sustain. The music that followed the resolution of the falling out reflected the outcome of that negotiation. Albums that pushed further into the classical territory that their voices deserved. Recordings that prioritized artistic truth over market research. Performances that had the specific quality of music made by people who are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, rather than a commercially optimized version of it. The audience is noticed, not consciously, not in the way that people who follow the business of the music industry notice things, but in the way that audiences always notice when something is genuine versus when something is managed. In the quality of their response, in the depth of the emotional connection, in the specific, irreplaceable feeling of music that is coming from a real place, landing in people who are ready to receive it. The falling out with the record label was the most difficult institutional challenge of Il Volo's career. More difficult, in many ways, than the opposition at Sanremo, because it came from inside the relationship rather than from outside it, from people who were nominally their partners rather than their opponents. But it was also one of the most important things that ever happened to them, because it forced a clarity about their artistic identity that might never have been achieved without the pressure of a genuine conflict. It required all three of them to articulate, clearly, directly, in a high-stakes context, exactly what Il Volo was and what it was not. And having made that articulation, having defended it under pressure and come out the other side with it intact, they carried it forward with a confidence and a conviction that had not been there in quite the same way before. The label relationship continues, reconfigured, different from what it was, but still a relationship. Because the commercial infrastructure that a major label provides is genuinely valuable, and because the music that Il Volo makes is genuinely worth distributing to the largest possible audience. But it is a relationship on different terms now. Terms that reflect the full reality of what Il Volo is, not a commercial product to be managed, but an artistic entity to be served. Three voices with a genuine musical identity that was worth fighting for, and that the fight proved could not be taken away. That is the story of the massive falling out between Il Volo and their record label. Not a story of victims or villains, but a story of artists who knew who they were and refused to be anything else, even when the cost of that refusal was genuinely high. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome to Il Volo Echo. We cover everything Il Volo right here every single day. Hit subscribe and come back tomorrow because we have something very special coming that you do not want to miss. And tell me in the comments, did you ever sense a change in Il Volo's music at a certain point in their career? A moment when something felt different or more authentic? I want to hear what you noticed. See you tomorrow.